Hi, welcome to Mocha Wave Talks. Here at Mocha Wave Publishing, we believe that every girl who reads has her own magic. And we are really excited today. Episode 3, I'm here with Dr. Crystal Elerson, who is one of my colleagues, but also a go-to expert on Sherlock Holmes. She and I have discovered this, kind of like we had this kind of similar Sherlock Holmes discovering journey in our lives, and it's been kind of fun talking to her while I was writing my book, Forever's Eternity, because there's like getting ideas, right, to include in my book and to make sure that I'm paying the respect and the tribute to Sherlock Holmes that he deserves. So would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Uh, so I'm Crystal Elerson. I work as a instructor at Texas Tech University. And when I was between 13 and 14 years old, I was exposed to Sherlock Holmes in the classroom through the Speckled Band. We read it and then we watched Jeremy Brett as a video for it. And that summer, after that English class, I was looking for something at the library and I fell in love. And since then, it's just been a passion of mine. But I also really enjoy writing in general, the whole concept. So I appreciated a lot of the storytelling aspects, the character aspects. And then, of course, my PhD is in English. And so I'm going to have had somewhat of a literature background, although my focuses are more in creative writing and technical communication. What I really liked about it was that I had kept a dictionary by my bed when I was reading, so I could look up the words. And there were times when, of course, I misunderstood slang or things like that. But it gave me, I don't know, it broadened my way of viewing the entire world.
Oh,
Um, and I really enjoyed the vocabulary. It's one of the things that I really enjoy about your book is that people, I mean, like most of the time I know all of the vocabulary, but every once in a while you hit upon a word that I'm like, oh, I haven't seen that in a long time. Let me go look that up. That actually excites me.
and sometimes I make up words.
I know this, but that's okay. We're English professors. We're allowed.
So what is this something that made you like Sherlock Holmes? Like what is it about him that drew you to Sherlock Holmes?
First, I think it was the use of logic. Now, Holmes, of course, calls it deductive ability, but it's really inductive reasoning. I mean, if we look at the scientific method, of course, we want to call it deductive because that's what Holmes said, but it was the logic, the way of approaching things, the concept of observation, of looking around and understanding things, even if we don't always react to it. And so my love of Holmes led to a lot of things in my life, including like study of micro expressions for Paul Ekman, because that's something that would have been a Holmes thing had that been a science at the time. And but so I guess it was the personality of the character, the fact that he didn't care what other people thought outside of his area of expertise. Like, he only needs to be respected within his area of expertise, and he's very arrogant and picky about it. But, you kind of understand it because he deserves that arrogance. I mean, he's earned it. Um, but he doesn't care about the other areas. I mean, is so indifferent, and I think many of us yearn for that level of indifference. We care as human beings about what other people think, and if they think poorly of us or they label us in some way, we are very offended, and he didn't. And I found that as something to emulate, not always to my benefit, but it is certainly something that is a worthwhile consideration.
Yeah.
And as part of your book series, okay, when the intercessors are going in and they are sucked in to the different stories, they go into these different portals, but they also are given the opportunity to participate and be themselves, but not themselves. Be the hero they wish they could be in regular life. And I really like how accessible that is and how it draws us into the story.
Oh, well, thank you. And that's kind of like when I was writing, and I know I've told you about it, is that I was thinking, I was going through this time of, like a lot of us, we're going through a lot of time of anxiety, depression during that pandemic. And I just used that as an escape. And I was like, you know what, just do what you want to do, be your own hero. So I was kind of like living my own fantasy as I was
Yes,
watching.
the whole be your own hero is really prevalent throughout the series. And of course, I've been reading it aloud to my husband during
Oh,
his chemotherapy. And that's something that we've talked about. We've talked about the incredible use of vocabulary. We've talked about the whole concept of, you know, you get to be your own hero. You get to imagine yourself in these places. It's so accessible for everybody. And, we focused, of course, on Peter Pan and Sherlock Holmes,
yeah.
and those are characters I just adore. And so it's fantastic to be drawn into those worlds and see them in new interpretations and new lights.
One of the things as I was writing that I started discovering is Sherlock Holmes and Peter Pan are actually a lot alike, weirdly. You know.
Thought about it before, and it's probably not super, like, it's not a superficial thing. This has to be much deeper. Tell me what you're thinking there.
Well, like as I was writing, I said I've got to have a moment where Sherlock Holmes and Peter Pan talk because when my first crushes was Peter Pan on Disney, and
Mhm.
then I went on, and of course 15 I went on to Sherlock Holmes. I even learned how to play the violin and everything just so I could be like Sherlock Holmes.
I get that. I was so disappointed I was stuck with the viola.
He was like, no, I got to be the violin. And I'd be like, oh, I don't need anybody in the world, just me and my violin, I'm happy. um but Sherlock Holmes, and especially this became clear when I was reading about Jeremy Brett and how he was creating that background story for his character, Sherlock Holmes,
Mhm.
that he was a child that was neglected. Well, Peter Pan was kind of rejected, right? He was cast
Well, yeah, he's like the ultimate
a lost
neglected
child.
child.
Yes, the ultimate, he can't get in, right? He's
Mhm.
kicked out and he can't get back in. And Sherlock Holmes has felt like he's kind of outside. He's somehow felt maybe not as he hasn't. I don't think he's been rejected. I mean, he has his brother, and he talks about his grandmother and things. But I think he kind of felt
Well, I think in a way he is rejected, though. I mean, think about it. He doesn't have that many friends. When we first meet him in A Study in Scarlet, he, you know, he's having trouble finding a roommate. He wants to have these rooms, and he's obviously already established himself in practice as a consulting detective, but he's looking for a place and he doesn't really have any friends. And so Watson, who also doesn't really have a lot of friends, okay, runs into this old colleague, Stamford, and meets him and is like, hey, there's this other guy I know. It's the second person today who's mentioned they're looking for rooms. Maybe you two should meet each other. But they neither one of them have a lot of friends. Watson even establishes early on when he's making that list of Holmes's, attributes in the Study in Scarlet. He talks about Holmes doesn't have anybody really come to visit him, and neither does Watson until every once in a while somebody will show up and Holmes will say, I need the sitting room. I need the sitting room. Please leave me alone. Before we understand the concept of what Holmes is and doing. And so this is a way to relate. If you've always felt like an outsider, like somebody looking in, even if you've been accepted, you're part of your peer group, but you still feel that
point.
separateness because you view the world differently.
And I think it's always been kind of interesting because it's like he doesn't need anybody, but he does, right?
He needs Watson. He needs Watson.
Yes, he desperately does, really. I mean, and then I love the stories where you find out how much he desperately needs. Like deep inside, he's been kind of hiding it, but he really cherishes Watson and as a friend. So I like those.
Yeah, he cherishes his friendship, but he's absolutely oblivious to how rude he is. In a way, that obliviousness is endearing. I mean, if we had to put up with it in person, we would probably find it really annoying. But in fiction, we can find it endearing when he says things like, you may not be luminous yourself, but you're a conductor of light. Okay, when he says something like that, and you just want to go, oh, you jerk. Or, his description of women, that of course is going to be hard for you and me. His idea, is it a curling tongue, or
Oh, that part, yes. I have actually have a little reference to that in my book because that's like something that stuck out to me.
because it's so offensive.
Yes, like I said, there's a lot of similarities between Sherlock Holmes and Peter Pan, even though it may not be obvious at first, right? You may think, oh, they're totally different. One's a boy, one's a man, one's got a pipe, one's got pixie dust. There are similarities, and they're both coming from a similar time, in history, the authors. And I think actually Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and James Barrie were friends
I did not know that. That's kind of interesting, especially, when you think about Doyle and his other
Case of
fiction.
Identity. Yeah, I think it was the Case of Identity where Sherlock Holmes says to Watson, if I could take you by the hand and we could fly out that window and fly over, London and peek out into all the rooftops. And I just thought, that's a totally Peter Pan type scene, right? You see him flying over. I think also another connection between Peter Pan and Sherlock Holmes is the Baker Street Irregulars and the Lost Boys. Because Sherlock Holmes has his little group of sort of rejected boys, the boys that nobody pays attention to. The street Arabs, they call them at that time.
Those that are seen but unseen. They're seen but they're not noticed. They can sneak into anywhere and nobody cares because, hey, it's just a little boy. It's just here's another urchin here or there. And yes, the Lost Boys, go through, they're the same. They're very much the same. They are lost to society. They don't have a parental figure who's really watching over them.
But the thing is that you have Sherlock Holmes and he's the brother, he's the father, he's the one that will stand in for the woman when she needs
They
to.
show that in so many ways in the series. I mean, if you think about the solitary cyclist, they come to him for advice because she doesn't have anyone else. Several cases, it's women showing up and saying, hey, this has happened to me. Can you help me? And one of the ones, and you have referenced it in your book, where her hand, he looks at her wrist,
Yeah,
and he says, hey, what about these bruises? You haven't told us everything. And she's like, oh, that's nothing. He's
right.
like, yes, it is. You've been abused. And he notices. And that's something that I think all women are attracted to, noticing if somebody has harmed them. And I feel like it's the illustrious client or the eligible battler, where she's determined to marry someone who's bad for her. And there is a woman, Kitty.
That's in the illustrious client, yes.
Yes. Okay. Who has had oil of vitriol put on part of her face and her chest and things like that. And so she is disfigured and she wears her hair a certain way. She goes and she talks to the woman to try and explain, hey, this is what has happened. Of course, the woman doesn't believe her even when she shows. And of course, Holmes is not expecting this because of the way she's wearing her hair. But at the same time, his urge is to protect. His urge is to take care of this person who has been harmed.
And I think
he says over and over, I only care about the case, but that's not true. That is what he tells himself.
There's the times where he takes the law into his own hands.
Very much so. That's oh man, the Blue Carbuncle he releases. Yes. And
Abbey Grange, where he and Watson are the judge and jury.
Yes, and they decide to free him. But also
that guy deserved to die. He was mean. So
those are not the only ones either. I mean, they're the problem. No, that's not the problem of Thor Bridge. It's man, there are so many different ones. The Blue Carbuncle jumps to my mind, where he's holding the carbuncle over the guy's head and he's like, okay, you've begged enough or whatever, you will be free, but don't ever do this again. And so the guy flies. It's always under different circumstances, but he definitely just makes a decision of, I am the law here and I'm not going to turn you in because the actual law is too stupid to figure it out. And I think this is a good opening for the concept of, just because it's a law, does that make it just? It lets us examine that. That doesn't mean I think, everybody should be judge, jury, and executioner. Just, should we examine the law itself? Is it really apropos in this situation?
I mean, the one that won my heart was the Speckled Band. That one convinced me that he was a good Sherlock Holmes. Because I like that moment where they're doing the poker, right? And Sherlock Holmes, he goes, in the book it says he smiled, small, broad, and he laughed, right? And then Jeremy Brett is doing that.
Oh yeah, it's such a great scene where Roylott comes in and he bends the poker and Holmes unbends it. He was like, I might not be as bulky, but and he laughs at what this guy, well, what an amiable person.
I love that
Oh,
scene so much.
oh, I love that. Would you say that your interpretation of Holmes in Forever is Eternity is a combination of the original stories, but also the visuals that you have seen over the years, the Jeremy Bretts, the Basil Rathbone, and I know you like Ron Howard as well. So all of those, would you say that those sort of influenced your interpretation of the character in your story?
Yes, I think I pulled like a little bit of everything that I liked and put them together to make Holmes. There's some things I just had to do, like a tribute to. It's like Sherlock Holmes never leaps over the sofa, right? But I'm like, oh, I gotta put the leap over the sofa there. 'Cause he's
I
like,
actually think in one of Brett's films, he does leap over the
yeah,
sofa,
they
but I
showed,
don't actually see it. But it wasn't in the original stories. It was just a great interpretation of the eccentricity of Holmes's character.
yeah, it's like I think he was really trying to say, how do I convey all that energy that's inside of Holmes, that all that pent up emotions that he's and still keep.
Well, yeah, like he sings and he does other things, and he's like, and he's very like high strung in a way. And
Mhm.
then there are other times when he has no energy whatsoever. He's, "Oh." And I think that Brett does a good job of portraying that. I feel like most of the other series only portray the high strung.
Ah,
They
okay.
don't really do the lethargic part.
Mm.
Although Benedict Cumberbatch does. They have parts where he's, laying on the sofa. It's a three patch problem instead of a three pipe problem, which was a good callback. Um, but so they do it okay with him, but they don't do it with a lot of others. And I think it was the era of filming many of the times.
Oh, okay.
Because like they actually did The Dying Detective, which is one of my favorites, where he is supposedly dying, and so you don't see the same type of energy. You see a range in the acting. And of course, the character itself is, I mean, there's so many different little perspectives to interpret. And so you can pick one thing and just really focus in on it, or you can try and do a general. And I feel like Brett, depending on the episode, was doing general. He focused on different things per episode,
Mhm.
whereas Rathbone was sort of always focused on the intellect and the energy. I feel like uh, Benedict Cumberbatch did a good balance. I feel like Ron Howard was probably focused most of the time on the energy and the detection.
Yeah.
I feel now, of course, I've never seen the William Gillette stuff, but I assume that was more about the detection. The plays that I've seen, it's always, of course, focused on the mystery itself, but it's how the nuances of the character that I find
Yeah.
interesting. And I feel like in your story, you have tried to portray some of those nuances.
So if I was going to pick my favorite stories, some of the things that are important to me are, one, that it's showing us a new aspect of Holmes,
Hmm.
that it reveals something about him that we didn't know. Because I always like to find the little nuggets, right? The little before, and we find out something, some part of him that we hadn't seen.
Hmm.
I love it when he shows emotion, and I think if he was always showing emotion, that wouldn't be so special. But because he tries to be so calculating.
Well, it's the same aspect of value that we see in Star Trek with the Vulcan characters.
uh, so we want to know a new aspect of Holmes, deeper emotion. Of course, it has to show his deductive ability because that's part of what Holmes is.
Hmm.
Inductive, but they call it deductive.
Of course.
Um, and I always like the ones where he's defending those who have been controlled or abused in some ways, like we were talking about.
Hmm.
Um, so how to rank those, I don't know. Maybe you can help me. And also maybe you have different ideas of ones that I should include that I haven't. So I'm
Well,
gonna
there's always like there are so many different aspects that you can find something to love about almost all of the stories. I'd have an easier time ranking my least favorites.
that's true. I should do that actually. Maybe that's my
Just say, all right, the Sussex vampire can just go die as a story.
the story was a little better than the movie. I don't know what they were
Oh,
thinking with that movie.
I
That was the
don't know
worst.
what they were thinking with that film. That is the worst film
That is,
of the Brett ones.
I cannot watch that one.
I
Like
think I've sat through it twice.
I watched it once and something was going wrong with my machine and it kept on pausing. So that made it even worse. And then I said, no, let me give it another chance. Let me watch it. And I watched it again, like, no, it's still bad.
In our top 5, we're gonna have to rank the Speckled Band.
Yes, the Speckled Band has definitely got to be in there. It has his deductive ability, right? His ability as a detective. He's definitely protecting the woman, right?
Yeah, he's protecting an innocent from an abuser. I mean, it's not necessarily direct physical abuse, but he's trying to kill her. So
Yeah, that's really bad. And well, she has he's done something to her because he sees those bruises, right? And he notices.
right,
So
right.
he's done some manhandling. Whether it's just forceful, like the way he does with the
Come here, yeah, but still, he has handled her roughly, and so yes, he's totally defending an innocent here, defending someone who has been abused for a long period of time. It's not just about money, but he's also fighting an intellect.
That's true. Yeah. So that's other person thinks, and the royalite has always gotten away with things because he's powerful and he's mean and he's landed, right? He's got the position.
I still, whenever I see a 4-poster bed, I look at the ceiling and I see if there's like a bell pull or a thing. Not because I think somebody's trying to kill me. It's just this story is still in my head, so I look for it.
Yes. Oh, I know. And I love it though that Sherlock Holmes in that story, he notices the bed was clamped
To the floor. You could not move it. It had to remain next to the bed pull and the vent. And I mean, that it was significant. I feel like readers could have sort of come to the conclusion. I felt like there were enough clues there, but it wasn't obvious in any way. I mean,
No.
you'd have to be able to think of a snake, that would do this. So one of
And
the
then
other stories that's fantastic to me that I would put in a top 5 ranking would be The Second Stain.
I have the second stain on my list too. Yeah.
Now, what I love about it is that there are what I love about it is there are so many different aspects to it. There's the concept of, the people coming in that are freaked out and Holmes going, yeah, I'm kind of busy, whatever.
And
Then there's the
really
wife
important.
coming in. Watson reveals stuff that he shouldn't. He makes faux pas that are nice because anybody would make those. Okay. This is the everyman right there. But Holmes is like, no, I can't talk to you about that. And very much shows his work ethic there. It's not being against a woman, although it could be read that way. It is about his own ethics of what he would share. I think if a man had come in, he would have said the same thing. But in the end, he goes very far to screen her, to help her.
Yes, I love that. And that's actually the same one where he says that, and I have this reference in my book about like the slightest thing could mean, volumes, or it could just be
Yeah, the hair tongs, or
curling
that one.
or whatever. Like, oh, they're just worried about their fingernails and their hair or whatever.
Women are so inscrutable.
Women are so inscrutable. And yeah, that's again, I always feel like that's a case in point of him saying one thing and his actions showing something different, right?
And he also does a magic trick. I mean, it's not shown as a magic trick, but it's a magic trick where he slips the letter in and fools the dumb ass husband. It's not like that, these brilliant men, the ones that, I mean, the prime minister is one of them. There's more to this than meets the eye. No.
And I love it that they have their diplomatic secrets. He has his diplomatic secrets. Their diplomatic secrets. It's the world is at stake, right? Or the England is at stake, right? But here, there's a woman's reputation, a woman's love, her security. All of that is at stake.
It's really important.
Yes.
In some ways, you could read into it as his secret for making this marriage continue. Okay, so they don't lose faith in each other, helps the diplomatic world, and so he is saving the world by saving this woman.
Exactly. I love it. I love that so much. And I know that at the end, Jeremy Brett does the little thing, right? He jumps. I love that too.
That is great little jump, and I like how they freeze it. It's a good way of showing his eccentricity and also showing him as one who can experience joy because we don't think of him as a joyful character.
Well, he walks out, and he's like, we have our diplomatic secrets. He's like, I've been holding it in. I'm holding it in. I don't have to.
Another favorite of mine is the problem of Thor Bridge. Is that on your list?
I had that on my list and I wanted to keep it, but I took it off. But I kind of, I'm trying to think maybe I'm gonna put that back on. Tell me your.
My thing with Thor Bridge is the mystery. I love the mystery of it. The whole concept of, she had to have been killed on the bridge by this person, and the gun was never found. We found a match to it and of course this is pre fingerprints and gunshot examination, so we don't know exactly that the bullet came from this gun. But I really liked how they solved it, how Holmes went out there, he tied the string. And what's really interesting to me is there's the Sherlock Holmes Society, the Baker Street Irregulars. They went out and reenacted this thing to see if it was real, and they actually put a dent in a bridge. And I thought that was fantastic. But I loved the whole solution of it. The whole, hey, we've set it up. She's obviously guilty. Here's all of the things, we have nothing else. And so it's kind of like, except for without the actual locked room, but it's like a locked room mystery. And locked room mysteries are notoriously difficult to solve. There's always some trick to it. If the window was nailed shut, then somebody has sawed off the nails. If there's always some sort of thing that not everyone's going to see. And I really liked that. I liked Holmes going out of Baker Street,
Yeah.
going to the location, going on the bridge. Um, this it just had some very nice aspects, but it also happened that the guy who brought the case to Holmes was a jerk.
Yes, that's what I was going to actually point that out. It's like that's one of my favorite parts is he kind of tells him off, right?
He's like, well, if the woman like this was under my care, I wouldn't have taken advantage of her like that. I mean, he has an attitude towards this guy. He does not like this guy, but he still solves the case.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that he doesn't like the person. What matters is the truth of the situation. And of course, you find out the woman that he's saving, and again, it's a woman, is a good, honorable person who is really trying to use what influence she has in the situation she's in the society she's in, to help others. And so you really cheer for him when, he solves it and figures out that the wife killed herself and was, a nasty, vindictive, wanted to frame, but understandably unhappy woman.
Yeah. I have Scandal in Bohemia, and I don't know if maybe I might switch that out with the Thor Bridge, but
Well, Scandal in Bohemia is hard to dislike because of Irene Adler, and whether you say Irene or Irene, depending.
yeah, depending on who's saying it. Yeah, Irene.
But it's also, an instance where Holmes recognizes the client who comes in. He's like, I know who you are. Stop trying to make a mystery at both ends. He puts him in his place, even though it's a royal.
Yeah.
The issue at hand, if we look at it through a modern lens, is stupid.
I know that's one thing. I was on the balance because I like this. The case itself is not stupendous, right? It's kind of a weird situation. But one thing I like is that at first we see Miss Adler in one aspect. She's an adventurous. She's manipulative. She's out to, stop this marriage and whatever it takes. And at the end, we realize no, she's actually a victim. And she's actually a very intelligent woman who is just trying to protect herself in this world where the royals can take advantage of them. And so Sherlock Holmes gets that new perspective of her, and he's willing to learn. The king offers him the ring, and he's like, I don't want your stupid ring, right?
Yeah, I want this photo of this amazing woman that is unlike any I've ever seen. And then, of course, as the only person that Holmes was ever even close to romantically attracted to, Irene Adler stands out.
Yeah.
She is the woman as Watson described her. And I think kind of like Moriarty, who was a bit overused in, modern fiction. She
Mhm.
comes back, and most of the time when she comes back, she's used very well. But it is a anomaly in all of the 56 short stories and 4 novels. You go to the opposite end of things. So one of the ones on my list is the Dying Detective.
Mm.
Okay, where Holmes doesn't trust anybody in the story whatsoever, not even Watson, although he should. But he knows Watson doesn't have the acting ability to pull off the role. And so, what I like about The Dying Detective is it shows how far Holmes is willing to go to get the, I guess, admission in this case, because there's not really, I mean, like, he figures it out, but then he's got to prove it.
Yeah. And then he has
Yeah,
the, oh, Watson's behind the curtain.
yeah, Watson's behind my bed, behind the curtain, whatever. And, but I mean, he starved himself for like 2 or 3 days, or maybe it was a week. I don't remember what. He's got Mrs. Hudson, his housekeeper, totally believing that he's dying, so much so that she finally sends for Watson. He won't even let Watson in. And this is where we find out Watson's middle name, which I love, is Hamish. So, but Watson has to yell it through the door before he'll even let him in, and that he still won't let Watson touch him. And he tells Watson, well, I don't have confidence in your ability, which is extraordinarily hurtful, but we accept it because of all of the other things that he has said, being a jerk through the
Oh,
years.
yes.
And then at the end, he's like, of course I trust you. Of course I couldn't let you touch me, because if you touched me, you would know that I was faking it. So I had to keep you away. But he wanted Watson to be able to be truly scared when he went and talked to the guy who had supposedly poisoned Holmes with the little uh,
Needle or whatever.
needle in the box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. From not wanting to play Sherlock Holmes at the beginning and not understand, like not fully understand him too at the end. People want this. People,
Mhm.
this is something that is helping. And even as he was, on his deathbed, very, very sick, he was sad. He says, I'm so sad because I can't do more Sherlock Holmes. People want, to help, to get the people. And the doctor,
I didn't know that. Wow.
and the doctor said, but now people have video. At the time we had videotapes, now we have,
Mhm.
of course, streaming, but now we have videotapes and people be able to watch them over and over again. And that made him feel more at peace.
Yeah, because he could affect people beyond his lifetime.
And he
The
said
thing
that,
is it's such an enduring character.
yes, and that the fact that he was thinking and that he had that, I thought that was so nice that he had that where he was never really, I mean, he was Freddie, and he was a couple of things that people thought about or watched, but he was not famous really until he,
Yeah, and this, I mean, it made him an icon.
yes. I'm just always so happy that he had that and he realized that people, that,
I do think he realized the effect he was having. And of course, not at first, but then, like I said, with him making that adjustment to the character because of the children watching, it really affected him how much he was able to affect others, how much they loved the character. And I don't think, I mean, I know in England, of course, Holmes is an enduring character. It's just part of the fabric of existence there. But I don't think that anyone really realized how much it affects the rest of the world, how enduring he really is as a character. Holmes is just, he's something people aspire to.
yes.
He's something that can be used as a focal point for teaching the concepts of logic, uh, for inductive reasoning or deductive, depending on what you want to say. Um, but it's also an aspiration of, hey, I don't care what other people think. I'm going to be myself. My freaky's going to show, and I'm going to be okay with it. In fact, I'm going to make a whole job out of it.
One of the ones I did have on my list, which was I saw just a second ago. Okay, Devil's Foot. I was wanting to put on there just because it has two really iconic, well, like very emotional moments. The one where he does the experiment,
Mhm.
and he says, and Watson rescues him, and then he
And he's
realizes,
like, I should never have put you in danger like that, and I shouldn't have done it to myself either.
Yeah, and then Watson's like, oh, he cared. You know, like, I was like, those, oh,
Yeah.
yes. And then, of course, at the end, when he says, if I had loved a woman, like,
Hmm.
the fact that he can actually think about that and see it from another person's perspective, even though he's never, had that. Um,
And I agree, and that's a strength of Holmes, is that he's able to put himself in the position of other people.
yeah, I like that. And the fact that, he can imagine himself that if he did love a woman,
Hmm.
that he and
He
he
can see,
that he
yeah,
would be very he would defend her.
he'd
He would,
protect them. Yeah, he'd be protective. He might be vengeful. Yeah. I,
yeah, like I would go to such length if I had a woman that I love that much, right?
and it allows you as the reader to make the association to Watson that if something happened to Watson, Holmes would be vindictive.
And that leads right into another one I wanted to put. And again, I'm on the
It's so
edge.
hard.
It's so hard. There's so many. The three Gary deaths. They never did film that quite. I mean, they kind of put a little element in,
Yeah,
but
but the
um,
Garrett Debs, yes,
just that moment when the guy shoots Watson and that reaction, I was like, the whole thing was worth it just for that moment. The rest of it,
mhm.
that's why I was like, the rest of it is like, this, business as usual. But in that moment, that's what I was, oh, this is my favorite story of all, just because of that moment where
Well, yeah, because we get to see how much he really cares and what he would do, the lengths he would go to. We already know the lengths he will go to for strangers, but now it's the lengths he will go to for someone he actually loves.
yes, and that Watson gets to see it. Oh, it was worth it to get that one just to see that.
And of course, we never know where Watson is wounded anyway. Is it the arm? Is it the leg?
It was just like I think they just said it was just actually just a slight wound, but he was like,
It was a flesh wound, but hey, Holmes jumped to my rescue. Yeah. You know, I actually ended up, and here's what's funny is that I normally won't do this, but I ended up putting the Hound of the Baskervilles in my top 5. The reason I normally wouldn't do it is because it's so overdone in the films.
mhm.
Okay. If there's going to be a Sherlock Holmes film and they don't know what else to do, they're going to do the Hound of the Baskervilles because it really is a great story.
Mhm. Yes.
I ended up putting it on my list because of Doyle's descriptive language.
Ah,
We see a lot of Watson that we don't normally get to see as much of. We see a lot of him in The Hound. When Holmes finally shows up, it's in a trickster sort of way. He's been having Watson's letters waylaid so he could get them, and he's been hiding on the moor, and he's been observing, and he's been cooking really nasty food.
love that addition in the Granada where he says like, try to see.
That was fantastic in the Brett series. Yes. It's been done so many times, and sometimes it's done well, sometimes it's done poorly, but when you read through it, you get lost in the descriptive language. There are times when you might be like, let's get back to Holmes, let's get back to the mystery. But I have to say, Doyle's descriptive language there is gorgeous. It's some of the most beautiful writing ever. You feel like you're there on the moor. And I realize that's not one of our criteria necessarily, but it is why I ended up putting it in my top 5.
But I think, and I did, my story is a big section that is kind of like the Hound of the Baskervilles. They actually go into the book of the Hound of Baskervilles. So one of the ones I also wanted to put on there for another reason is Charles Augustus Milverton.
Oh, Cam Devil. Okay, first of all, I remember Cam Devil for the rest of my life because of that story. And the Milverton story is incredible. How it was acted by Brett, but also just the story itself. Like, we can get rid of all of the reenactments. That is a fabulous story. And I like seeing Holmes as a crook. They stole it. They hide behind the curtain. That hiding behind the curtain is my favorite. And of course, the conversation the next morning with Lestrade is fantastic.
Could have been Watson.
I think I'm interested in this case.
I love that. And the fact that again
This
he's protecting the woman, right? The woman that had been
Yet again,
wronged. And he said, well, the
the
guy
one who
deserves
comes in and actually kills Milverton right in front of him, literally, shoves her shoe into his face. And he's like, yeah, let's let her get away. Let's just burn the rest of the stuff. And I love how he goes back and he's not just protecting her, he's protecting everybody that was in that safe. I mean, there could be hundreds, and he doesn't care. He doesn't read it. He's just burning it all
Yes.
because it's the right thing to do.
But it's one of those stories that you want to fill in the story because you want to find
Mhm.
out more about that. Like she's like, I'm engaged. Oh, he says, oh heavens, those talks. And you're like, oh, I want to know what those talks were.
You talk about. Yes, and then again, you also sort of want to be the person he was having the talks with, even though it's not a real relationship. You want to have the talks just because you could have had them with Holmes.
You kind of like, if I had been the maid, you're like, what would I have done?
This would be entirely different. I would go to 221 Baker for street and confront him and say, "Aha, you romanced me, now you owe me."
Yeah. And one thing that's kind of interesting is that this is a little bit of trivia that you may not have noticed is that the bad guy in my story, one of the bad guys is Tepoff.
Mhm.
So in the stories, they actually mention, how they always bring in these stories that you never find out about just to make it like, oh, and that one story that
Yes, I saw the reference to Algiers. Or
the
not Algiers, Sumatra. I think there was a reference to Sumatra, and I'm like, ooh.
this is that, and then I had, but there's a character called Trepoff
Ah,
that they mention, and so there's a count, someone called Trepoff, and that he solved a mystery. He's busy with the Trepoff case. And so I took the word Trepoff and combined it with Vlad Tepes, and I made it Tepoff.
Tepov. Oh, that's a nice addition. I like that. Yeah,
So
I think I'm catching most of the Holmes references, but I'm probably missing one or two, a few of them. And that's a good one. That's a great one.
Yeah, so there's ones that when you go back and and that's what I wanted is that you go back and you're going to see things that you probably are like, oh, okay, that one. Even just like sometimes it's just a nuance or a phrase, or like I said, sometimes
I enjoy rereading because I get new things out of rereading a story that the first time I might have been focused on the characters, but the
Yeah.
next time through I'm focused on the setting or whatever. And
Yeah.
so I like books that I can reread. And so I'm glad that you wrote for that.
I was thinking, I've got, it's kind of like I want to put this in, but I don't want to make it obvious. I'm just thinking, sneak that in there.
Oh, and it's so hard to figure out what's obvious to you. Will it be obvious to the reader? Because you put it in, but the reader may just gloss right over it.
So to rank them, I don't even know if we can, because it's
know
really
that we really can either, because I don't know that. I mean, I would say the Speckled Band only because it was first. That would be the main reason for number one. I don't know if I could choose.
like if I had to put down to 5, I don't know if I could actually say like in an order which one was the most. Besides, the Speckled Band definitely stands at the top. Scandal and Bohemia.
Just don't read the Sussex Vampire, okay? No matter what you read out of all of them, don't read that one.
I actually do have a reference to it in my book, though. I think he says like, oh, wasn't he last in Sussex or something like that, the vampire? So I think the good thing is that even though if we are not able to fully rank it, I think we've discussed some of the most important ones. And I think that's important. We looked at the aspects that met our criteria and why we chose at least to put on our list of must reads, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or ones that if you're going to read the Sherlock Holmes stories, you definitely want to not miss the ones that we've talked about. Like,
yes, we agree. Start with the Speckled Band.
Speckled Band, read The Scandal in Bohemia, Devil's Foot. Once you've gotten to know him a little bit better, read The Devil's Foot.
Mm-hmm. The Second Stain.
The Second Stain. Oh, for sure, you have to read The Second Stain and watch the Brett movie. And the 3 Gary Debs, just for that one moment, and where he's showing his feelings for Watson and Abbey Grange, where he says, nope, that creep deserved to die. So, I want you two to be happy together. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today on Mocha Wave Talks. I'm so glad that you were able to share with us, and I feel like we learned some things, and then it helped us also to share some of the things we love about Sherlock Holmes too. So thank you.
We should always share Sherlock Holmes.